In the heart of Washington, D.C., the Rayburn House Office Building's hearing room buzzed with a tense undercurrent, the air thick with the weight of an impending clash under the stark glare of fluorescent lights. Senator John Neely Kennedy of Louisiana sat at the center of the storm. His navy blazer slightly rumpled, his tie loosened just enough to suggest a folksy charm, but his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses betrayed a mind honed for battle. His southern drawl, warm yet deliberate, and his calm demeanor masked a strategist who had already mapped the chessboard before him. Across the polished table sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Dallas, Texas. Her dark hair pulled back tightly, her suit crisp, her gaze burning with a fire that promised a fight. The cameras lining the walls, their lenses glinting like unblinking sentinels, captured every flicker of movement, the faint rustle of papers, the occasional cough from the audience, the low hum of air conditioning as the room pulsed with anticipation. The agenda was federal education reform, a topic that carried the hopes and struggles of millions of children, from urban schools in Dallas to rural classrooms in Louisiana. But this was no mere policy discussion. It was a political arena, a crucible, where power could be seized or lost in a single sentence. Kennedy's hands rested lightly on a stack of documents, his fingers tapping faintly, as if keeping time with a plan already unfolding. He knew Crockett, a rising star known for her passionate oratory, would come armed with stories designed to stir hearts and pin him as the villain. But he also knew her weakness, a reliance on emotion over evidence, a tendency to let fervor outshine facts. His eyes flicked toward her, not with hostility, but with the quiet confidence of a chess master, awaiting an opponent's misstep. Crockett, adjusting her microphone with a deliberate flick, exuded certainty, believing she could corner Kennedy with the story of Jamal, an 8th grader from South Dallas struggling in a crumbling school. She saw this moment as her chance to expose Kennedy's votes against education bills as callous, to paint him as a defender of the elite. But Kennedy was prepared, his documents brimming with data, his strategy crafted to turn her emotional assault into his triumph. As Senator Amy Klobuchar, the chair, rapped her gavel, the room fell into a charged silence, broken only by the click of cameras and the scratch of pens on notepads. Crockett stood, her posture tall, her shoulders squared like a warrior entering a gladiatorial arena. Her eyes swept the room staffers, reporters, senators before locking onto Kennedy with a piercing intensity. "Senator Kennedy," she began, her voice low but sharp, each syllable a calculated strike. "You've sat in these halls, time and again, voting against bills that would fund our schools, our children, our future. You've chosen the privileged, the ones who already have, over the kids in my district who are fighting just to learn." The room stirred, murmurs rippling as heads nodded in empathy. She pressed on, her voice rising, infused with a passion that pulled the audience in. "Let me tell you about Jamal, a 13-year-old 8th grader in South Dallas. He does his homework under a streetlight because his mother, working 2 jobs at a grocery store, can't pay the electric bill. His school? It's a building with peeling paint. Textbooks so old they're held together with tape, desks that wobble, and teachers stretched so thin they can't give him the time he deserves. Jamal dreams of being an engineer. But how can he when his classroom feels like a trap?" Her voice trembled with conviction, her hands gesturing to draw the audience into her story. A story she believed would force Kennedy to face the consequences of his votes. She pointed at him, her finger steady, her eyes blazing. "Senator Kennedy, have you ever stepped into a school in South Dallas, where kids swelter in classrooms without air conditioning in the Texas heat? Have you seen the defeat in a child's eyes when they're told there's no money for new books, no hope for a computer lab? Or do you only know the numbers on your spreadsheets, the ones you use to justify slashing funds for kids like Jamal who need them most?" The audience murmured again, some nodding, others scribbling furiously, but the astute noticed a crack in her armor. Her story, though powerful, lacked data. a foundation to anchor her accusations. She forged ahead, undeterred, her voice growing fiercer, her hands punctuating each point. In my district, families are battling to give their kids a chance, but they're up against a system that fails them. Schools in South Dallas are crumbling not because the people don't care, but because leaders like you, Senator Kennedy, turn your back on them. You vote against the very bills that could buy new textbooks, fix broken desks, give kids a shot at a future. This administration, which you stand behind, prioritizes tax breaks for the wealthy over classrooms for the poor. Dallas isn't just a city, it's a community of workers, parents, dreamers who deserve better. But you choose to stand with those who have everything, not those building this country from the ground up. She paused, her chest rising and falling, her eyes still locked on Kennedy, daring him to respond. A few clapped sporadically, moved by her passion, but most held their breath, waiting for Kennedy's counterstrike. Kennedy sat motionless, his hands clasped, his head tilted slightly, as if studying a puzzle unfolding before him. His eyes never left Crockett, and a faint twitch at the corner of his mouth betrayed a confidence few caught. He had predicted her strategy. Emotional stories, pointed accusations, a narrative designed to cast him as the antagonist. But he saw the flaw: her lack of numbers, her personal jabs at him and the administration, her reliance on feeling over fact. In his mind, each word she spoke was a step deeper into the trap he had set. A trap built on data, logic, and a narrative that could turn her own stories against her. Crockett, sensing his silence, leaned forward, her voice dropping but still sharp. "I'm not here for political games, Senator Kennedy. I'm here for kids like Jamal who have no voice in this room. You may vote against them, but I won't let them be forgotten." She sat, her eyes still fixed on him, believing she had landed a blow, that she held the moral high ground. But she didn't see the chessboard. Kennedy, with an unnerving calm, had catalogued every weakness in her speech: the absence of evidence, the attacks on him and the administration, the way emotion overshadowed strategy. An aide behind him gave a subtle nod, signaling the plan was on track. The cameras caught Kennedy picking up his pen, jotting a brief note on his documents, then looking up, his eyes sharp as a blade. The room stirred, the audience sensing a storm brewing. A journalist in the back whispered to a colleague, "She just picked a fight with the wrong man." Crockett, still radiating confidence, didn't realize she had stepped into a game Kennedy had already calculated several moves ahead. When the chair called his name, Kennedy stood, his movements deliberate, his demeanor composed but not ostentatious, like a general preparing a decisive strike. The room, still buzzing from Crockett's fiery words, sank into a tense silence, the kind that precedes a reckoning. The faint cough of an audience member, the rustle of paper from a corner, and the hum of cameras formed a taut rhythm. Kennedy touched the microphone lightly, a deliberate gesture, then looked straight at Crockett, his gaze cold but calm, like an archer locking onto a target. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, his southern drawl resonating, low and authoritative, commanding the room's attention. "I respect the story you shared about Jamal. It breaks the heart, and I believe we all feel that pain. But if we stop at stories, we'll never get new textbooks into Jamal's hands, never fix those broken desks you spoke of." He paused, his eyes sweeping the audience, drawing them into his narrative, setting the stage for a response that would shift the entire dynamic of the room. The air crackled, the cameras zoomed, and the audience leaned forward. Knowing what came next would be more than a rebuttal, it would be a masterstroke, a moment that could redefine the debate and leave Crockett scrambling to recover. The hearing room in the Rayburn House office building was a cauldron of tension, the air heavy with the aftershocks of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's fiery opening salvo. The faint hum of cameras, the rustle of papers, and the occasional whisper from the audience wove a taut backdrop, like the prelude to a storm. Senator John Neely Kennedy stood at the podium, his posture relaxed but deliberate, his navy blazer slightly creased, his tie still loosened to project that Southern everyman charm. His eyes, sharp and unyielding behind wire-rimmed glasses, locked onto Crockett with the precision of a hunter sizing up his quarry. The room, still reverberating with the emotional weight of Crockett's story about Jamal, the South Dallas eighth grader struggling under streetlights, now turned its collective gaze to Kennedy. The audience and senators, staffers, journalists sensed a shift, a pivot from passion to something else, something calculated. Kennedy's fingers brushed the microphone, a subtle gesture that commanded silence, and the room obliged. The only sounds the faint scratch of pens and the soft whir of air conditioning. He had anticipated Crockett's strategy. A heartfelt narrative, accusations of elitism, and an appeal to the moral high ground. But he also saw the cracks in her armor, her reliance on emotion without data, her broad-brush attacks on his voting record, her failure to offer concrete solutions. In his mind, Crockett had handed him the pieces to dismantle her argument, and he was ready to assemble them with surgical precision. "Congresswoman Crockett," Kennedy began, his Louisiana drawl slow and deliberate, each word rolling out like a pebble dropped into a still pond, rippling through the room. "I respect the story you told about Jamal. It's the kind of story that sticks with you, that makes you feel the weight of what's at stake. Every one of us in this room wants better for kids like him." He paused, his eyes sweeping the audience, drawing them in with a sincerity that felt personal, almost intimate. But stories, as powerful as they are, don't buy textbooks. They don't fix broken desks. They don't give kids like Jamal the education they deserve. If we stop at stories, we're just breaking hearts, not building futures. The room leaned forward, captivated by the shift in tone. From Crockett's fiery passion to Kennedy's measured calm. He opened a slim folder, pulling out a single sheet with neatly highlighted lines, holding it up not to boast, but to signal his preparation. "Let's talk about the truth, not with grand promises, but with numbers." According to the Department of Education, federal programs for schools like those in Dallas, which you represent, have received over $12 billion in the last decade. Yet, in that same time, dropout rates in Dallas have climbed 18%. Only 62% of students in your district read at grade level. If federal funding is the answer, as you suggest, Congresswoman, why are the results moving backward? The question hung in the air, sharp and unyielding, like an arrow aimed at the heart of Crockett's argument. The audience stirred, some flipping through their own notes as if to verify Kennedy's figures, others whispering to colleagues, sensing the tide turning. Crockett, seated across the table, gripped the edge of her documents, her knuckles whitening, her eyes flashing with a mix of anger and unease. She opened her mouth to interject, but Kennedy pressed on, his voice steady but cutting. "I'm not here to point fingers at Dallas," he said, his tone softening slightly, as if to disarm the room. "I'm here to ask why kids like Jamal are still struggling despite billions poured into programs you defend. The truth is, Congresswoman, 55% of that federal education budget never reaches the classroom. It's swallowed by administrative overhead, bloated contracts, and projects that sound good on paper but deliver nothing. That's not justice for Jamal. That's a betrayal of every parent, every teacher, every kid counting on us." The room grew quieter, the scribbling of a journalist's pen the only sound breaking the silence. Kennedy's words were like a scalpel, precise and unrelenting, exposing the flaws in Crockett's emotional plea. He shifted his stance, leaning slightly toward the audience, his voice taking on a conversational warmth, as if sharing a story over coffee. "Let me tell you about Sarah, a 14-year-old girl I met in Baton Rouge. Sarah goes to a school not unlike Jamal's leaky ceilings, outdated books, teachers stretched thin. But last year, A local program in Louisiana, funded by a mix of state and private dollars, got Sarah's school new textbooks and a computer lab. It cost a fraction of the federal programs you champion, Congresswoman, and it worked. Sarah's now coding her own apps, dreaming of college. She didn't need Washington's billions. She needed a system that delivers. The audience murmured, some nodding, drawn into Kennedy's story, which carried the same emotional weight as Crockett's, but was grounded in a solution, not just a problem. He turned to Crockett, his gaze direct but not confrontational, like a teacher addressing a student who missed the point. You accuse me of voting against kids, but you didn't mention the bills I voted against were packed with waste millions for consultants, for bureaucracy, for programs that never see a classroom. I said no because I want every dollar to reach kids like Sarah and Jamal, not get lost in red tape from here to Dallas. Crockett couldn't stay silent. She stood abruptly, her voice trembling with frustration. Senator Kennedy, you can't stand there and claim you care about kids when your votes cut funding for schools that need it now. Your local programs don't help the thousands of students in Dallas who are falling through the cracks today. Her words were passionate, her hands gesturing forcefully, but they lacked the specificity to counter Kennedy's data. The audience noticed, some shaking their heads, sensing her argument faltering. A senator behind her scribbled a note, his brow furrowed, as if realizing the gap in her response. Kennedy tilted his head, a faint smile crossing his lips, not triumphant, but the quiet confidence of someone who saw the board clearly. Congresswoman, he said, his voice calm but laced with a subtle edge. I'm not just talking about caring. I'm talking about results. Last year, Louisiana's local education initiative helped 3,200 students get access to better resources at a third of the cost of your federal programs. In Dallas, your city's own data shows 4,500 kids are still waiting for basic school supplies. If that's what you call progress, I reckon we need a new dictionary. The room erupted in soft murmurs. A few Republican senators nodding in approval, one even cracking a smile. Crockett's face flushed, her eyes darting to her papers as she tried to muster a response. You can't compare Louisiana to Dallas. She shot back, her voice rising. Our challenges are bigger, our schools more crowded, our needs more urgent. But her words sounded hollow, like a fighter swinging without landing a punch. Kennedy raised a hand, a polite but commanding gesture as if to say, "Hold on, I'm not done." He stepped closer to the podium, his voice dropping to a low, resonant tone, each word measured for maximum impact. Congresswoman, I'm not comparing. I'm stating facts. Poverty doesn't care if you're in Dallas or Baton Rouge, black or white, urban or rural. But when you stand here blaming me and this administration, you're dodging the real question. Why, after years of your party's leadership in Dallas, are kids like Jamal still studying under streetlights? Where's the money going? Who's accountable? The question landed like a thunderbolt, the room falling silent as Crockett stared at her documents, flipping pages frantically, but finding no lifeline. The audience felt the weight of her silence, like a curtain falling on a stage. Kennedy pressed his advantage, his voice now carrying a sincerity that pulled the room in. I'm not here to tear you down, Congresswoman. I'm here for Sarah, for Jamal, for every kid who can't wait for another failed program. We need solutions that work, not promises that sound good. And solutions start with admitting that the system you're defending isn't delivering, not for Dallas, not for Louisiana, not for anyone. He spread his hands, as if embracing the entire room, his tone low but powerful. We can do better. We have to do better. But that means facing the truth, not hiding behind stories that tug at the heart, but don't fill a classroom. The audience sat rapt. Then a ripple of applause began, not just from Republicans but from neutrals, persuaded by Kennedy's blend of data and relatability. He concluded with a line that cut like a blade. "Congresswoman, you might move hearts, but moved hearts don't buy school books. If you want to help kids like Jamal, bring solutions, not just tears." The applause swelled, loud and sustained, echoing like a verdict. Crockett sat down, her eyes vacant, her hands limp, as if the fight had been drained from her. A Democratic senator nearby whispered to an aide. She walked right into it. The cameras captured the moment. Kennedy, standing tall, adjusting his glasses with the calm of someone who had executed a flawless plan, while Crockett bowed her head, her face etched with defeat. A journalist in the back row muttered, "This is going viral." Kennedy's aide, standing in the corner, checked his phone, a faint smile forming as the first clips of the exchange began to spread online. The room, still buzzing with the intensity of the clash, knew this was more than a debate, it was a turning point. A moment that would echo far beyond the marble walls. The Rayburn House Office Building's hearing room, moments after Senator John Neely Kennedy's devastating counterstrike, felt like a stage where the final act had just concluded with a resounding climax. The air, once thick with the electricity of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's emotional plea, now carried the weight of a decisive shift, as if the room itself exhaled in the wake of Kennedy's victory. The faint creak of chairs, the hurried whispers of senators, and the relentless tapping of journalists' keyboards formed a chaotic symphony, a soundtrack to a political showdown that had left the audience staffers, reporters, and onlookers stunned, as if they had witnessed a prize-fight end in a knockout. Crockett sat at her table, her shoulders slightly slumped, her fingers twirling a pen in a restless rhythm, her eyes clouded with the realization of defeat. Her once fiery presence seemed dimmed, like a flame flickering in a sudden gust. Across from her, Kennedy remained seated, his posture relaxed but commanding, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the light as he exchanged a brief word with an aide, his expression unwavering, as if he had always known the outcome. The cameras, unyielding in their scrutiny, captured the contrast. Kennedy, adjusting his tie with the calm of a general who had secured the field, and Crockett, her hands motionless now, her face betraying a quiet resignation. The audience, from the front row of senators to the back row of young staffers, felt the shift in power, a palpable change that rippled through the room like a tide turning. A Republican senator leaned toward an aide, whispering, "He just ended her," while a Democratic colleague near Crockett flipped through papers, as if searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. One of Crockett's aides, her face tense, typed furiously on her phone, likely drafting an urgent message to the communications team. But no one could deny the truth. Kennedy had owned the room, and Crockett had been relegated to the shadows. The aftermath spilled beyond the marble walls almost instantly. A young journalist in the back row, hands trembling with excitement, uploaded a 30-second clip of Kennedy's closing line. "Moved hearts, don't buy school books to Twitter." Captioning it, "Kennedy just obliterated Crockett. This is history." Within minutes, the clip exploded across social media, a wildfire racing through dry grass. #Kennedy Clapback surged, hitting 15,000 mentions before the hearing even adjourned. On TikTok, the clip was remixed with dramatic music and bold text overlays. Young users from urban centers to rural towns posting reaction videos, some nodding in approval, others recreating Kennedy's southern drawl with exaggerated flair. A Baton Rouge high schooler posted, "I'm from Sarah's town, and Kennedy's writer new books came from local programs, not D.C." MAGA supporters led the charge, sharing the clip with comments like, "Kennedy schooled the Dems on how to win a debate." Even neutrals were swept up. One user tweeting, "Not a Kennedy fan, but he brought receipts." Crockett had nothing. Crockett's supporters tried to rally, posting videos defending her passion and her story of Jamal, but their efforts were drowned out by the tidal wave of Kennedy's moment. One user summed it up, "Crockett's got heart, but Kennedy's got heart and brains." News outlets pounced. Fox News aired an analysis within hours, calling Kennedy's performance a masterclass in dismantling emotional rhetoric with hard facts. A commentator remarked, "Kennedy exposed the cracks in Democratic education policy, and Crockett had no counter." Neutral outlets like CNN acknowledged the mismatch, with one article noting, "Crockett came with passion, but Kennedy left with the win." Even liberal-leaning sites admitted Crockett's lack of preparation, though they sympathized with her message. A piece on a progressive blog read, "Crockett's heart was in the right place, but in politics, heart alone doesn't cut it." Back in the hearing room, the aftershocks lingered. A journalist near the exit texted her editor, "This clip's going viral, Kennedy owned it." An aide to Kennedy, standing discreetly in a corner, scrolled through his phone, a faint smile crossing his lips as number Kennedy Clapback climbed past 50,000 mentions. Audience members began to filter out, not to rest but to share the moment, their phones buzzing with texts and posts. As if they had witnessed a seismic event, Crockett remained at her table, trying to maintain composure. But her slumped posture and the way her eyes avoided the cameras betrayed her struggle. An aide approached, whispering something, perhaps a plan to spin the narrative, but Crockett only nodded weakly. Her usual fire dimmed. A Democratic senator placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of comfort. But the room knew this wasn't just a loss in a debate, it was a moment that would follow her, replayed on screens across America, from Dallas diners to Louisiana bars. Kennedy, in contrast, was already moving forward. He leaned back in his chair, exchanging a quiet word with his aide, his expression steady, as if the victory was just another step in a larger plan. He knew the clip would spread, not just for its biting final line, but because it tapped into a broader truth. People were tired of promises that didn't deliver, of passion without results. An audience member leaving the room turned to a friend and said, "He made her a cautionary tale." Outside the hearing room, the narrative was taking shape. Kennedy capitalized on the momentum, appearing on a national talk show days later, his eyes as sharp as they were in the Rayburn room, his voice calm but compelling. "Kids don't need grand speeches," he said, hammering his message. "They need books, desks, teachers who aren't drowning in red tape. That starts with accountability." He announced a new education bill, one that leaned on local solutions, blending public and private funds to cut costs and boost efficiency. Commentators praised the move, calling it a savvy play to leverage his viral moment into policy. In Louisiana, residents in towns like Baton Rouge and Madisonville sent letters of gratitude, proud of a senator who spoke for them. One teacher wrote, "He gets what we need, not just words, but action." In Dallas, Crockett returned to a different reality. Her office was flooded with calls from supporters, offering encouragement, others from frustrated constituents demanding answers. At a community center in South Dallas, a parent confronted her. "You spoke for us, but why weren't you ready for him?" Crockett stood before the crowd, her voice steady but lacking its former spark, emphasizing her fight for kids like Jamal. Yet her eyes betrayed a weariness, a recognition that her defeat in Washington had cast a long shadow. Some residents rallied behind her, particularly those moved by her story of Jamal, but others felt she had let them down. A single mother said, "I wanted her to win, but she got outplayed." Political analysts labeled her performance a misstep, a lesson in the cost of unpreparedness. A liberal outlet wrote, "Crockett has the heart, but heart isn't enough in a room full of sharks." Her political rivals in Texas began circling, whispering about challenging her in upcoming elections, sensing a vulnerability they could exploit. Kennedy's victory, meanwhile, rippled outward. His proposed bill gained traction, with some Democratic senators grudgingly admitting its potential. Nonprofits in both urban and rural areas began exploring how to replicate Louisiana's local model, which Kennedy had highlighted. A Dallas school principal, though no fan of Kennedy, said, "He's right about one thing: our kids need results, not just money." The clash, though it began as a personal duel, sparked a broader conversation about education reform, with Kennedy steering the narrative toward efficiency and accountability. In Louisiana, bars and coffee shops buzzed with pride, residents toasting a senator who had defended their struggles against Crockett's accusations. A Baton Rouge parent said, "He talked about Sarah, but that's my daughter's story." In Dallas, reactions were mixed. Some, especially in underserved neighborhoods, appreciated Crockett's passion but wished she had brought more to the fight. A young teacher in South Dallas said, "She tried, but Kennedy was ready, and we needed her to be." On social media, the clip of Kennedy's takedown racked up millions of views, shared across platforms from Twitter to Instagram. Online forums overflowed with reactions, from praise for Kennedy's precision to memes mocking Crockett's faltering response. One user wrote, "Crockett walked in like a lion, but Kennedy left like a legend." The moment became a symbol of logic triumphing over emotion, a reminder that in the political arena, preparation is the sharpest weapon. Kennedy stood before a small school in Baton Rouge days later, surrounded by teachers and students, his jacket casual, his voice carrying the same sincerity that had won the hearing room. "We don't need promises that sound pretty," he said, shaking hands with a teacher. "We need schools that work, one classroom at a time." The crowd nodded, some with tears in their eyes, feeling heard in a way they hadn't before. Crockett, back in Dallas, faced a community event with a brave face, but the weight of her loss lingered, a reminder that passion, no matter how fierce, crumbles without a foundation of facts. The clash between Kennedy and Crockett wasn't just a viral moment, it was a milestone, a lesson etched into the fabric of American politics. Kennedy proved that in a world of division and rhetoric, data and strategy could cut through the noise. He didn't just defeat Crockett, he exposed a deeper truth. Education, like any challenge, demands solutions over sentiment. For Crockett, the defeat was a bitter pill, a cautionary tale for any politician who steps into the arena without armor. For the public, from Louisiana's bayous to Dallas's urban streets, the moment underscored a universal need: leaders who prioritize action over words, who build bridges between communities rather than walls. As Kennedy walked away from the Baton Rouge school, a child handed him a drawing of a classroom with new desks, a small gesture that carried the weight of hope. He nodded, not promising miracles, but saying, "We'll get there, one step at a time." The wind carried his words through the schoolyard, a quiet pledge that this fight begun in a hearing room would change lives far beyond its walls.